this is Carolyn Glick, the host of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour. I'm joined by my co-host of the Carolyn Glick Middle East News Hour, Gadi Taub. Hello, Gadi.
Hi, you've been to America and we missed you.
Thanks. Well, I missed you too, but it was certainly nice to see the family in America. So
but it's a consolation to be with your mom as opposed to being with me.
Right, exactly. She made up for it. We hadn't seen her since the beginning of the corona, so it was really important for us to see her again, and hopefully we'll see her much sooner now, because that was just very hard for me and for the kids and everybody. So, but we're home. We're home out of the frying pan into the fire, and we're back. So we've had a very eventful in this world, that is, we, the people of planet Earth, have had a very disturbing, really, set of events that has occurred in Afghanistan over the past week and a half, since the Americans effectively unconditionally surrendered to the Taliban. And Gadi and I are going to spend the first half or so of our broadcast talking about the implications, what it means, what the Americans are actually doing behind all of the propaganda, behind all of the fake news that the administration, sadly, are the main ones putting out. We're going to talk about what that means for America standing as a global superpower. In the second half, we're going to talk about what it means for Israel, as our incredibly unpopular Prime Minister Naftali Bennett makes his way to Washington. We're recording this show on Tuesday night. And as we speak, the great His Royal Highness Naftali Bennett, the first prime minister to ever serve who was not elected by the people, is on his way to usher in a new era of American-Israeli camaraderie, as he said, with a new American administration, not Trump, and a new Israeli government, not Bibi. And everything's going to be fine, and they're going to come together, and they're going to figure out how to prevent Iran from going nuclear. Even as they're on the threshold of being a nuclear threshold state. So we're going to talk about that and how we're supposed to look at this entire trip. And once again, the great Naftali Bennett in the context of what the Americans are doing now in Afghanistan. So without any further ado, let's move to Afghanistan. What do you think, Gadi? Is that a good idea?
The scenes from Kabul were distressing, not just disturbing. And what was, I think, striking is that other armies of much weaker states, the Azerbaijanis or the Ukrainians, were doing much more to protect their own and to protect other citizens, not because the American troops were heartless, but because they seem to be completely constrained by orders that they have. I saw some moving scenes with Marines saving kids, but the United States is behaving like it was the junior partner here, or the weakest party around, and this is a terrible message for stability worldwide.
It's a terrible, terrible message, and it's a grave tragedy. You know, I saw Laura Logan interviewed with Tucker Carlson earlier today in one of the many clips that I was watching, just trying to get my head around what's happening. And she said, you know, the worst thing about what we're seeing right now is that both the United States, both the administration and the Taliban are unifying their messaging. They're both presenting this as if it was unavoidable, as if this was absolutely inevitable, that the Americans would be defeated and that the Taliban would win, and that there's nothing that could possibly be done about it. But this is, of course, a lie. This was a choice. Biden is making a choice now when he says that he's not going to extend American presence in Afghanistan after August 31st, a week from today, which essentially means that they're going to stop evacuating civilians today or tomorrow, because they have to roll down or roll out, roll up their entire military mission there as well, and all of their diplomats. So they're going to have to stop evacuating American citizens, civilians that are trapped in Afghanistan, and the Afghans who are working for the Americans almost immediately, if they're really going to abide by the deadline or the Taliban's ultimatum. And this is not true. They don't have to do this. The Americans are infinitely more powerful than the Taliban. And if they wanted to, U.S. SEAL was on Fox saying, if he were Biden, he would say, we're going to take over every single airfield in Afghanistan now to evacuate our people. And if you so much as look at us wrong, we're going to kill you. We didn't come here to negotiate with terrorists, which is exactly what William Burns, the director of the CIA, did today. We're not negotiating with terrorists. That's why we came to Afghanistan, because we killed terrorists. That was the whole point of the war on terror, was that we weren't going to bow before the Taliban. But here is Biden, the same guy who took a knee to Black Lives Matter and to Antifa, is now taking a knee to the Taliban. He is literally begging them to let him evacuate Americans. He's not allowing U.S. forces to do their job. You know, one of the worst things that I heard today is that the department, the U.S. government department in charge of the evacuation, isn't the Department of Defense, it's the Department of State. And because it's the Department of State, it means that the decision was already made and it's already been accepted by everybody. Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, Tony Blinken, the secretary of state, Jake Sullivan, the national security advisor. These people have all agreed that the Americans are not going to fight for their citizens. They're going to leave thousands of Americans behind enemy lines. They're trapped. They're trapped. You know, Politico published today or yesterday a story which is so alarming. Like, you just, once you hear it, you can't get it out of your head. The Americans left behind, not only in, you know, their own installations, but in the Afghan government buildings that now the Taliban controls. All of the biometric data of all of the Afghans that were working with them, all of it, their fingerprints, their eyes, everything, their retina scans, everything. They have everything, all of the personal information, and of course, the cell phone records of all of the Afghans who have been working with the Americans. They don't need a roadmap. They have an azimuth to every single Afghan who was working with the Americans. They all have a scarlet letter on their forehead. They're all sitting ducks. They can just be picked up anytime. If they don't get out before the Americans leave, they're stuck. They're dead men walking. They'll be tortured. They'll be murdered. Their families will be murdered. Their families will be tortured. Their children will be raped. All of these terrible things is what is going to happen to them. And let's not even talk about the plight of the women and girls in Afghanistan, or even the boys in Afghanistan, where, you know, pederasty is the big thing.
Khashoggi, this is what we're distressed about in terms of, of human rights.
Well, you know, the Saudis, I mean, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but the Saudis just signed a defense pact with Russia. You know, they're done with the Americans. They figured it out. You know, I don't even know if they needed this in order to figure it out, but certainly immediately after this happened, they set to work finalizing a defense pact with the Russians. The U.A.E. are fast on their heels. Iran, one of the untold heroes of the Taliban war effort, you know, that they were supplying them with logistical support, that was supplying them with weapons, that was supplying them with fuel. All along, you know, they were their logistical base, and they're allied with the Taliban, something we were never allowed to acknowledge, right? Because, you know, they're Shiites and the Taliban are Sunnis, so they can't possibly be working together. The fact that all of al-Qaeda's leadership, their Shura Council, decamped after the Tora Bora battle in 2001 to Iran, and their headquarters were moved to Tehran after the fall of the Taliban at the end of 2001. Nobody ever talked about that. The Iranians enabled the entire al-Qaeda war against U.S. forces as well. From Afghanistan, they moved to Iran and they directed the war in Iraq. So this is all Iran, and Iran is obviously a major beneficiary of the American rout and humiliation. The Chinese and the Russians immediately greeted what happened by doing what? By allowing Iran to join the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is now a growing in power economic forum that the Chinese founded about a decade ago. And the Iranians have been asking to become members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization for the past decade or so. And the first thing that they did after the American rout was give them membership. And then I think yesterday, the Washington Free Beacon reported that later this year, in early 2022, the Russians and the Chinese are going to be holding joint naval exercises with Iran in the Persian Gulf. Now, what are they going to be training for? Oh, they're going to be training to defend against piracy. Now, what does this mean when Iran is carrying out acts of piracy against merchant vehicles owned by Israeli shipping companies that are, or other civilian companies that are in port in the UAE, American ships? It means that the Russians and the Chinese and the Iranians are going to be training to conduct naval warfare against civilian shipping in the Persian Gulf. All right, this is in the immediate This is in the immediate aftermath of the Americans' unconditional surrender of Afghanistan to the Taliban. So these are just a few of the things.
How would you define the war aims, though? Because the thing is, Americans keep doing that, and it's true of right and left. It may not have been true of Trump to that extent, but it was certainly true of Bush. They start with a national security interest, and then they expand their definition of the war aims to bringing democracy to the universe. And this is what happened with the war in Afghanistan too. The war in Afghanistan is not, when you say they should have won it, I don't think there is such a thing. This should have been a garrison, and the garrison should have stayed there, as a garrison is stationed since the 50s along the 38th parallel in the Korean Peninsula. There's no way, you can't get out. If you want to prevent a terrorist organization from acquiring not just real estate but a state, then you need to stay there. It will be impossible to just wipe
Israel
out the Taliban.
is obviously, Israel learned this on our backs in Lebanon. And when we walked away from Lebanon in 2000, the Hezbollah took over Lebanon. We said, oh, they're only attacking us because we're here. No. They're attacking us here because we're here. The minute that we leave, they'll be attacking us in Tel Aviv, which is what they've been doing. So, the whole idea, or in Dimona, which they now, they have missiles that reach. So the point is that you keep your forces there so that they don't come to you at home. Same thing, of course, with Gaza. Oh, we don't need to be in Gaza. They're only attacking us in Gaza because we're in Gaza. Yeah. But then we left Gaza and they started attacking us in Ashdod and in Ashkelon and in Tel Aviv and Jerusalem. So, I mean, it's all an optical illusion. When I was in Iraq with the 3rd Infantry Division, when they invaded, one of the things that was so amazing for me, I came from Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem, we were having suicide bombings every day, practically. In 2003, it was a little bit less, but not that much. And we had several of them right by my house, one of them right outside my house. And I remember coming to Iraq and being in the Bradley fighting vehicle with the crew, and they were killing, and the Iraqis were coming at them with these old Datsun pickup trucks that were like suicide trucks. They were packed with explosives, and they wanted to ram the Americans, and the Americans were picking them off with missiles from 3,500 meters. And for me, it was like this exhilarating experience, right? Because Israel we took years to be able to get into Ramallah, which was 10 kilometers from my house, to go after suicide bombers or Bethlehem, and so we were being butchered in the streets of Jerusalem every day. And here the Americans, they traveled 12,000 kilometers from home to go kill them where they lived. And they were keeping America safe. There was such an incredible feeling of power being there and knowing that the Americans were going to them instead of letting them come back to America after 9/11. And, the thing that your point about the garrison is well put, because they had a garrison. In July, there were, for over 18 months, there had been only 2,500 Americans stationed in Afghanistan, and not one of them had even been wounded since February of 2020. And what was their job? Their job was to enable the operation of the Afghan army on the one hand, and on the other hand, to get all the information that the Americans needed to prevent any of the terror organizations that are part of the Taliban nexus, Al-Qaeda.
But that doesn't mean that this force is
up.
Enough. I don't think it
was enough.
It wasn't partly enough. I read some commentators comment on that, because the Taliban were smart enough not to harass America until it decides to leave or to run away. So I would say, you would need, how many soldiers do you have in Korea? I think you have
30,000.
30,000. So no less than Korea, I would say, because Korea is a more orderly place, and and when there's an orderly place, you need a smaller force. Here, you're sinking into chaos. This is a swamp. The Taliban is a swamp, and partly you have to remember, and I keep saying this to people whom I argue with about the Israeli-Arab conflict is part of the problem with the Arab and the Muslim world now, is that a lot of this is not a form of sovereignty, but a form of a chaos that is undermining any kind of sovereignty. And this is what we learned in 2011 with the so-called Arab Spring. We learned that there is no political principle in this region that is stable. And this comes at the end of many, many different attempts, from this, the Sykes-Picot agreement in the second decade of the 20th century that tried to impose national structures. And then there was Arab socialism and pan-Arabism and many attempts to create different kinds of order, and then political Islam, which turned out to be an agent of chaos and nothing of this has survived. So it's back to Bernard Lewis, who said, that there are only 4 nation states in the Middle East, and that these are Israel, Iran, Turkey, and Egypt, and all the rest, he said, are tribes with flags. And when you have something like the Taliban, and the Taliban is more than just a tribe, but it's still a collection of tribes, and it's still a very chaotic force, then I think you need a larger force there. But first of all, you need to define your war aims, and I'm curious to hear what your definition is and how you see it.
That's the thing. I mean, you said the Americans started. I mean, it's true. America it went into Iraq because Bush claimed that Saddam Hussein was one of the major engines of the terror nexus that the Americans went to war against after 9/11. I mean, there were a lot of reasons. Israel was, despite the anti-Semitic propaganda that has been raging in the United States since the invasion, Israel is very opposed to the war in Iraq because Sharon said to Bush at the time, he said, look, Saddam Hussein was neutered in 1998 when Clinton imposed the no-fly zones in northern and southern Iraq. The UN monitors, the UN inspectors, weapons inspectors have decimated their force. What was left of it after you guys decimated it in the Gulf War in 1991. The real head of the snake of terror is Iran. But for reasons that, I don't think we're going to have time to get into today, the Americans have not wanted to reckon with the fact that Iran is at war with them ever. Not in 1979, when they took over the U.S. embassy and took the U.S. diplomats hostage there for 455 days. They never wanted to deal with it, and they never have. And there's a story to be told there. David Wormser and I talked about it in my last broadcast from the Center for Security Policy, and I think people should look at it if they haven't seen that broadcast. It's very important. But the Americans never wanted to go to war against the Iranians, and they went to Iraq. And then once they got there, they weren't quite clear what they were supposed to do. So they said, well, let's make it a democracy. It was the same thing with Afghanistan. The idea of Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan, that there was going to be freedom. No, I mean, you can stop the enslavement of women and girls, just like the British did in India, the British colonial authorities, at least for the duration of your stay. But you're not going to be able to change a primitive medieval society into a liberal democracy in 5 weeks or with one election or what have you, because it's just not going to happen. At any rate, the Americans in both cases said, oh, okay, we can't just say it's about American war aims. It's not just about killing terrorists or whatever, because that's just unseemly and, mean. And the left in the United States had started an anti-war movement before the U.S. even invaded Afghanistan, while the embers were still lit up in the ruins of the World Trade Center. So they had this anti-war movement. Bush, I think Richard Pearl put it best after he left office. He wrote an article, I think, in Vanity Fair. He said Bush was president for 8 years and he never figured out what it meant to be president. He never knew how to do the job. And Bush sort of was never able to put together a coherent defense of Iraq, of the war in Iraq or of the war in Afghanistan. And then he didn't even try. And then he just gave up trying. And so instead of trying to explain, look, we have to defend our people, or how I felt when I was on the road to Baghdad when they were killing terrorists, I was to make clear, look, we have to keep them at bay there so that they don't come here. And it's going to take, 30,000, 50,000 US forces permanently based in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in order to protect our interests. And that's what we're going to do. And that's what we need to do, because otherwise they're going to come over here. Nobody ever made that case to the Americans. The person who came closest to it was Trump, but Trump wanted to bring them home. So he was trying to bring them home. He took most of them out. He left those 2,500 forces in Iran, in Afghanistan. And you may be right that they wouldn't have been sufficient over the long term, but they may have been sufficient most of the time. And, sufficient. And then you have, 1,000 or 5,000 forces from Fort Bragg and other combat bases in the United States that could be brought in on short notice to Afghanistan to kill enough Taliban to keep them down, and then go back to the 2,500. I mean, there are all kinds of ways that you could look at it, but the basic idea was, nobody ever made that argument to the American people. Look, there's a price for being a superpower, and we need to be a superpower, because if we're not a superpower, we're not going to be safe. So none of these cases were really made to the American people. And as a result, you were left with this festering anti-war movement that would, again, go up and down depending on the political season, saying we have no right to be there, we're occupiers, we're this, we're that, we're the other. The Taliban are an authentic expression of Afghani culture or traditions or whatever, and who are we? I mean, I don't think you had too much of that in Afghanistan, because Obama called it the good war. And so the progressives weren't opposed to the war in Afghanistan, but much more in Iraq. But the Americans never got used to the indelicacies of being a superpower. They always felt that they had to sugarcoat everything that they were doing in some idealistic, freedom agenda, which they weren't willing to actually carry through. Because if you really want to transform a society, then you can't leave it. Right? You have to actually make it into America, which means you actually have to always be there because you're America. And so that doesn't work.
How would you estimate what it does to the Biden administration? It's because for the first time, and I don't absorb as much American press as you do, especially these days where it's so depressing. It seems like for the first time, liberal journalists are beginning to criticize Biden. Is that an overestimation?
No, it's not. It's true. I mean, I was watching the Sunday shows on, I think ABC is Martha Raddatz, and so she had her panel on their Sunday news show, which I don't think I've watched in about 10 years, because why bother? But so you had all of these liberal journalists sitting there tearing apart Biden. And you even had this progressive woman there, who was speaking as the voice of the progressives or whatever. I don't know her name. And she was also she was trying to shift the blame the whole time to Trump and saying, well, it's Trump's fault. It's Trump's fault. But the guy from the Washington Post would have none of it. And he kept saying that's not true, and looking at her like she was crazy, which was really sort of weird. But they were all agreed that this is a shame, that this is a blight on America's reputation and good name. And it's, to use a Yiddish expression, it's a shanda. I mean, the Americans have lost all credibility. Biden is so mean, like he's mean-hearted. He just doesn't care about anybody. He's shown this abject contempt for American citizens that he has trapped in Afghanistan, that it's his fault personally that he's doomed them to death. And
I always doubt when anyone says Biden did anything. I'm convinced he's only half there. So I'm thinking, who really holds the levers of power there? Is there like a back room? I don't know. My nemesis there is Susan Rice, who's probably has her hand in all of these things. But Sullivan and Blinken, does any of that fire get to them? Because
all of it does. I mean, look, no, I don't think, frankly. I think that one of the reasons why Biden is president is because, from the time that he was vice president, at a minimum, he wanted to get Americans out of Afghanistan, and he didn't care what it looked like. He was opposed to Obama's surge. He did an evaluation of the whole war in Afghanistan.
To the taking out of Osama bin Laden.
Right. He was opposed to everything. Look, I mean, he responded to the 9/11 attacks by saying that the United States should give Iran $100 million in foreign aid. That was his immediate response.
In 50 years in Washington, I don't think he was on the right side of an issue ever.
No, but he keeps winning elections, and he won the presidential election on his record. So I think it's important to note that, because, the people who were saying you can't vote for Biden, knew exactly who he was. He was an open book. But
no, but they thought they were voting for Obama. Yeah, they thought they were voting for an Obama third term. That's
I think they are, but I don't think that what's happening in Biden's term, even though Obama supported the surge and he pushed the surge, it was during his period that the Americans suffered the greatest number of combat losses and also had the largest number of combat forces in Afghanistan, because he did the surge there. But I don't think that this would be happening if Obama didn't support it, because I think part of this is destroying the United States as a global superpower. And I don't think that is out of line with Obama's agenda. I think it's very much in line with Obama's agenda. I don't think that there's any daylight here between that. I think that they want Biden to take the fall for it, because he is, but I don't think that this is opposed to, Obama isn't sitting at home going, oh my God, what has Joe Biden done? So I think that that's important. I really think,
and I'm sorry if this is going to be too big a diversion, but is this not putting him in a more difficult situation vis-a-vis the JCPOA? Is it not going to be harder for him now to bend backwards in order to accommodate the mullahs in Tehran?
No, not at all. To the contrary, he can't do anything else, because when you see people like Martha Raddatz, Chuck Todd and other people, all of these Biden partisans in the elite media in the United States attacking him, then you realize that, and this goes back to that progressive woman. She said, well, we just expect him, to show more empathy on our issues, right? Because the idea here is that he's going to come home from this collapse of American credibility abroad and American power abroad, where America is being openly usurped, and really not usurped. I mean, they put it all on the table, and the Chinese are coming and the Russians are coming, and they're picking up all of the pieces of the lost American credibility, and they're transforming themselves into the successors of the United States on the global stage in the Middle East and Europe and beyond. And this is all his doing. And when he gets home, the only constituency that he's going to have that will remain loyal to him conditionally are the progressives, so that he is going to be pushing for the Green New Deal and for more deficit spending, more inflation, more destruction of middle-class America.
But is that not, excuse me for voicing some optimism on this show, I know it's blasphemy, but maybe it's going to, the Democratic Party has gone way over to the radical side, but there's still a small moderate faction. And can you not imagine a situation in which he's losing the majority in the House for support of his policies?
No, I think he's likely to lose the House majority in November of 2022, but I think what the moderate Democrats are saying, and there are only 9 of them, and what they're telling their Republican counterparts is, look, we can't vote with you on the budget. We can't vote with you on Afghanistan, censure the president or what have you, because Nancy Pelosi is threatening us with redistricting. So what happens with redistricting is that they gerrymander a district. They change the borders of a district to prevent whoever has won from getting reelected. So that they'll put more poor neighborhoods in your district, take out the wealthy neighborhoods, to ensure that the Democratic nominee, that you'll be primaried, and that the Democratic nominee will be whoever gets the poor vote. And the poor vote will always go to the Democrat, the progressive, and therefore you're going to be voted out by the progressive wing, or you're going to be defeated by Republicans, so that they're blackmailing them. One of them told a Republican counterpart I read today that they have a relative who's working in the White House, and they were told that the relative would lose their job if they voted with the Republicans. So they're being extorted for loyalty. This is bare knuckles politics. And so I don't see any rebellion on the part of what used to be called the Blue Dog Democrats, the moderate Democrats, the pro-American Democrats, if you will, against Biden, because they're all they're all being blackmailed. But I think, I do think that this gets us to the second part of what we wanted to talk about today, which is that our beloved Royal Highness Naftali Bennett is en route to the United States to meet with Uncle Joe. And, the Israeli media, such as it is, which is even worse than the American media that at least is criticizing what's happening in Afghanistan, the Israeli media has by and large ignored everything that's happened in Afghanistan because they're pushing this narrative that Biden is going to work with the great Naftali to prevent Iran from acquiring nuclear weapons. And just to be clear, Iran really is effectively a threshold nuclear state. They doubled the number of advanced centrifuges that they're using to enrich uranium to 60% purity, which is near weapons grade. And they're using 20% enriched uranium to create or to develop or to produce uranium metal that's used to form the core of a nuclear bomb. So they're moving very quickly. I mean, and there's no civilian use for these things. And in the face of this, I mean, this was published in a report by the UN nuclear watchdog. The Americans have done nothing. And in fact, Politico interviewed Biden's envoy to negotiations with Iran, Robert Malley, last week. And he said, well, it looks now like the new Iranian regime, we're not clear. All bets are off if they're going to agree to join the 2015 nuclear deal, which placed such and such restrictions on their nuclear activities. And so if we can't do that, then we have two options. The first one is we're willing to negotiate a completely different nuclear agreement with new parameters, he said. He didn't say what they would be. But essentially, if Iran refuses to go back to the 2015 deal, it's because they refuse to accept the restrictions that the 2015 deal placed temporarily on their nuclear activities. So when Malley is talking about a new nuclear deal, basically he's saying we're going to demand less of them, that they restrain their nuclear operations even less, and we'll give them, more limited sanctions relief, which they don't care about now that they're in the Shanghai Economic Organization. So I think at any rate, that's what he offered. And then the second thing, maybe we'll do some punitive actions with our European partners. What does that mean? Nobody knows. Nobody talked about military operations. And the fact is that at this late stage, the only real way to prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear state is by bombing several of their key nuclear installations in Natanz and Isfahan and Bushehr and in other places, in Qom. And they just have to be destroyed. And instead, what the Americans are talking about is having tougher nuclear negotiations, which they're not going to be able to do because, as I said, Biden is completely beholden to the progressives. And by the way, the other aspect of it is that they're making him own the Afghanistan defeat and humiliation. And on the other hand, the entire DC establishment, the intelligence agencies, the DOD, state, obviously, and the Democratic Party all support the nuclear deal. So if he's weakened politically, then the only play that he has is to go along to get along. The idea that the great Naftali, His Royal Highness, is going to be able to convince him to join Israel against all of these people to militarily attack Iran's nuclear installations is pure fantasy. It's pure fantasy. And the worst thing about it is that by meeting with, Wednesday is going to be meeting with Blinken and Austin and Sullivan. And then Thursday, the big day, he's going to be meeting with His Excellency Joe Biden, to meet with them now while they're leaving thousands of American citizens stranded in Afghanistan and betraying tens of thousands of Afghans who worked with the Americans over the past 20 years, it makes him look like a partner in this. Like he's giving this some sort of a good housekeeping seal of approval as a U.S. ally. And that is not good for Israel, the United States, to be identified with Biden, particularly at this time. And by the way, Biden isn't going to thank him for it because, the Americans, the crazy thing is that to get to Washington at this moment, Naftali Bennett basically had to become an Israeli version of Biden, right? I mean, he didn't respond when Hezbollah attacked Israel with missiles. He didn't respond when Hamas attacked us with missiles, when they've been attacking us with incendiary devices that have been burning our fields and our forests in southern Israel. He didn't respond when a Hamas gunman came and shot an Israeli soldier, Barel Shmueli, at point blank range and a few days ago. And now Barel is fighting for his life at Soroka Hospital. He didn't respond to any of these things because he was pressured by Biden not to do so. And in the meantime, the Americans are giving the Palestinians 500,000 doses of the Moderna COVID-19 vaccine. This is after they refused 500,000 COVID vaccine Pfizer vaccines from Israel. He's giving them hundreds of millions of dollars in aid, both to Gaza. Oh, and Naftali is giving money to Gaza, and he's bringing in television sets and computers and DVDs and building materials, which are all going to be used to rebuild their tunnel network. So all of these things Naftali was required to do in order to get an audience with the great Joe Biden at Biden's own moment of distress. So he's paid all of this price to get this meeting with Biden. And Biden has just
because in
himself.
Israel, a photo op with an American president is considered priceless and to be.
Do you think it still is
political currency?
Do you think that? Here's the question that I have for you. Do you think that the Israeli public buys the media's buildup of this meeting and thinks that this is a really great thing that Naftali is meeting with Biden? How do you think that?
I think that half of Israel, the left half, which generally believes the media, though they may not be, this would not cause them to fall in love with Naftali. But had Naftali Bennett been shunned by an American president, it would have distressed them. So Bennett, who is a shrewd calculator of public images and nothing else, is right to calculate that since he completely lacks legitimacy, that any cold shoulder by an American president would be fatal to his bluff as the fake Prime Minister of Israel.
You know, people who watch us every week know why it is that he has no legitimacy, but there may be people tuning in for the first time. So do you want to just give a very short summation of what the problem is as we see it with Naftali Bennett?
It's very simple. He didn't get enough votes. So in our system, it's a British style system. You need to build a coalition in the parliament. Unlike Britain, we don't have a two-party system. So we have a very fragmented parliament. And Naftali Bennett had 7 seats. He now has 6 because one of his party members refused to take part in this political Madoff operation where he just stole the votes and transferred them to the other side, promising he was right-wing and then moving to the left. But he found himself, or he managed to maneuver into a situation where neither side could have a government without him. And so audaciously and outrageously, he demanded on the basis of 7 out of 120 seats in the parliament to become 5%. Prime Minister. And so what happened is that the left was happy to bribe him with the prime ministership in order to establish a left-wing, basically a left-wing coalition, which the radicals will control, with Naftali as a puppet. And as we see, he has no authority to pass any substantial decision because he's completely dependent on everybody else. So we have a fake prime minister. Basically, he's the spokesperson for the government because he has no authority at all. It's not just a theoretical question. It's not even just a question of this hard to grasp intangible thing called legitimacy. He just doesn't have the votes for anything. So he's a complete hostage of other powers.
You're right. And one last thing that I think I think you summed it up well. And the last thing that bears noting for people who aren't familiar with it is that Naftali's party, which now has 6 seats because one ran away from him, Amichai Shikli, he has 6 members. So out of 120 members of Knesset, that's 5%. all told in his government coalition that has 61 out of 120 seats, so it's a bare majority. The left-wing parties have 75% of the seats. The right-wing breakaway parties, there are three of them that are no longer right-wing, but they ran as right-wing parties. They have 20%, and then the last 5% of the coalition is comprised of the Ram party, which is a Muslim Brotherhood party, which is a Hamas party essentially. And so, aside from American pressure, the other reason that Israel didn't respond to Hamas's aggression, including the point-blank shooting of our soldier, is because it's very clear to Naftali that if he goes to war against Hamas, that Ram will leave its coalition. So Hamas actually controls his government, because he can't, because he'll lose his government if he actually defends the country. So we're in this crazy situation. And this is the guy who just got on a plane today to represent the state of Israel before an American president who just betrayed his country.
And if we're on the topic of the repercussions for Israel from the Afghanistan debacle, one thing is, Benjamin Netanyahu tweeted immediately after the escape from Afghanistan, the evacuation from Afghanistan. He said,
the rout.
He mentioned that he had this conversation with John Kerry.
Right.
While Kerry was Secretary of State. And Kerry said to him, basically, you get out of the territories and we'll guarantee the stability and the peace of this two-state constellation. And Netanyahu said, I told him right then that I would not trust that we have to trust ourselves. But look at what's happening in Afghanistan, and you'll understand why that was my reaction. So Israel
but can I just add, Netanyahu said one more point about that, which was really telling, which was that he said that Kerry wanted to bring him to Afghanistan to show him the wonder of the Afghan army, because he said, look, we're going to train the Palestinian forces to be like the Afghans. And they're going to protect Israel, just like the Afghans protect our interests in Afghanistan. And that was sort of the key here, right? Because the Afghan military collapsed. Now, never mind the fact that they collapsed because the Americans denied them the close air support that they needed in order to operate. But they were, the president accused them of responsibility for the rout, right? He said 69,000 Afghans have died defending their country and fighting the Taliban, and the president of the United States said last Sunday that they wouldn't fight. It's just it's criminal, the slander. And just 55,000 of them have died just in the past couple of years, since the Americans started withdrawing. So this is a total lie. It's a total slander. At any rate, Bibi just said, thank you, no thank you. But what's Naftali going to say? He's going to get that offer, And
he has no basis. I don't mean a logical basis. He has no political basis from which to operate any kind of lever against American pressure. So their only option, the only cards they hold now, is trying to pretend that they're cooperating with America, trying to convince the Israeli public that America has not deserted us. While if you think what a Netanyahu scale leader would have done going now to Washington is, I would imagine, saying in very polite diplomatic language, we cannot trust anybody with our security, and you don't need to say more to have everyone understand what this means on the background of the collapse in Afghanistan.
No, and I'll say more. If I were advising the prime minister, a real prime minister, not Naftali, what I would tell him is, if you want to go to Washington now, then you want to go there with a shopping list. And the first thing on your list are, the Moabs, the JDAMs. You want the bombs that the Americans wouldn't sell us, because they were too powerful. because those are the bombs that you need in order to destroy Iran's nuclear installation in Qom, which they built underneath a mountain. You need those because Iran buried their nuclear installations underground. So, that's all I would say. I would say, look, it's great to talk to you. Yeah, gotta love that peace process. I want some JDAMs, and I want them now. And if I don't get them, I'm going to go before those microphones, and I'm going to say that we can't trust the United States either. Okay. And I think that would basically be the way to play this week's visit. But you can be absolutely certain that that's not what Naftali Bennett is going to do. He got on the plane and he said, he had all of his spinners say, oh, we inherited a terrible situation with Afghanistan from the previous government. With Iran. It's all Bibi's fault. It's incredibly defeatist, right? Because you're saying, we're the victims of circumstances. This all happened on his watch. It's all his fault, not my fault.
How different is that from what the Biden administration is saying in America?
I'm telling you, I think that the same people are writing their talking points, and I suspect that I'm not too far from the truth. And so we inherited a terrible situation. Trump was responsible for Afghanistan. Bibi is responsible for Iran, and we're going to work. There's a new era of U.S.-Israel relations. We have a great rapport with them, and like Bibi had a terrible rapport with Trump. It's like it's craziness, and we're gonna coordinate our actions with Iran. What does that mean? Malley just said that the United States is going to have a weaker deal than the 2015 deal that gave Iran a glide path to a nuclear arsenal by 2030. And so you're going to ask for even less. That's their new strategy for Iran under Raisi. And this is an incredible situation with Naftali saying, now we have a new government in Jerusalem. We're nice. We love Democrats. Democrats love us. And then I'll just tell you one last thing on this. I was watching briefly because, you can't watch our news, our liberal news programs I can't anyway, for more than 5 minutes without taking an anti-nausea pill. But they had their Israel, Channel 12, they have a correspondent in New York who's an actual communist. Her name is Una Leibson. And so she gives this report and she says, well, Biden isn't going to be able to be too pro-Israel because, he has to worry about his party, but he is a true friend of Israel and he's definitely going to make that clear. So even they're ahead of time. They're making premeditated excuses for Biden not being nice to Naftali when they have their joint media appearance at the White House on Thursday, which is even more amazing, right? They're expecting him to be mean. So for all of the nicey-nices, that everybody's talking about, and what a true friend he is of Israel's, it's amazing that the media that is completely, on board, is a full partner in the Bennett government, they feel like they have to make the preliminary excuses. They have to justify ahead of time that the administration is going to come down on Israel very hard.
So we don't have a leader who can do the 2015 Netanyahu thing, which I was terrified of, I must say, when he went behind Obama's back and just spoke directly to two houses of Congress. But this is the kind of move that we would have needed now. I don't know to what extent we can still play this card, because what is happening with Israeli relations in Congress, partly because half the Jewish organizations are gone completely progressive, is that we no longer can trust any effective Israel lobby on Capitol Hill. And what we're not doing is we're not investing enough in personal connections with with Congress, with representatives and senators, and we should be. But we have a half ambassador there, right? We have an ambassador now, a joint ambassador to the UN and the United States.
Well, no, we have no ambassador to the United States because Gilad Erdogan quit that job.
But he held this double job, and so we didn't even have like a full-time person in Washington. But we need a full-time staff, because, as you said this many times on this show, there is an almost complete convergence between the pro-Israel people and the patriots in Washington. Mostly the patriots you can trust to be pro-Israel because they understand that this connection between America and Israel is not just a realpolitik thing, that there is a genuine alliance there between these two societies, which is an amazing thing in this political context. So amazingly, what we're facing now is that while Jews are making the wrong gamble and attempting to appease the progressive wing of the Progressive Party, behaving like, as Churchill would say, as if you feed the alligator in order to have him eat you last. Israel has a growing alliance with evangelicals, which I think is a striking testimony to the still substantial content of the abstraction called the Judeo-Christian culture.
You know, in the misery of the events in Afghanistan and watching this debacle and this moral crime unfold before our eyes, and watching the strategic collapse of the greatest power for good that the world has ever known. You know, one of the things that I found really stunning, like separate from this in a way, but also connected, was this tweet that I think we can put up by Bush's former CIA director, General Michael Hayden. Okay, General Michael Hayden was a never Trumper. You know, he was one of the most outspoken Republicans who hated Trump throughout the 4 years of the Trump administration. He was, you know, on all the networks saying, as a Republican, I'm embarrassed. I hate Trump. Trump's a meanie. Trump's the worst thing that ever happened to America. He's a Nazi. He's a white supremacist. Everybody who voted for him is evil, whatever. So last week, or actually this week, in the midst of everything that's happening, what Biden has done, what Biden is doing, what Biden and Blinken and Jake Sullivan and Mike Milley and all the rest of them are doing, General Hayden tweets out, or he retweeted this picture. It was a picture of a convoy of Islamic State trucks, pickup trucks, all with the colors of the Islamic State. And he mistook it for the Taliban because clearly he knows what he's talking about, but whatever he said. And then then underneath it was a picture of American patriots in a convoy of pickup trucks with every pickup truck had an American flag on it. And what was written was, these are their Taliban. These are our Taliban. And
yeah, the American flag. That's amazing.
It was American patriots. They're the Taliban. They're the Taliban. And, you know, in a way, maybe he's right. Not in, God forbid, in the sense that they're terrorists, but in the sense that the Taliban believe in something. They believe in something evil, but they're willing to fight and die for it. They've been fighting for it for decades. They're going to continue fighting for it because, you know, they believe in what they believe. It's evil and they should have been annihilated, but that's who they are. And American patriots believe in freedom. And they believe that the United States of America is the greatest force for freedom in the world. And that being American means being a free person. And that's what they love about it. And they believe in it and they'll fight for it and they'll die for it. And they join the US military and they fight for their country and that's what they do, you know. And you go out to Indiana, you go out, to red country, and you don't see, you go to Chicago. We were in Chicago and we were in Indiana, and you go in Chicago in my mom's neighborhood. The new mezuzah is Black Lives Matter signs in everybody's front windows. You have like, oh, we love Black Lives Matter. Everybody has a Black Lives Matter sign. You go to Indiana, everybody has an American flag. These are two different flags. These are two different people. And what Michael Hayden was saying is we hate the people with the flags. And, all of the critical race theory, all the purges of so-called white supremacists in the U.S. military, they're going after the greatest Americans there are. And yeah, you're right. These are the people who love Israel because Israelis are like them. We're also good old boys. We love our country. We're willing to fight for our country. We send our children to combat units in the army. We served in combat units in the army. We're not afraid of our enemies, except to the extent that, we don't fight them hard enough. And that's why we're such good friends. And so you see the elites in Israel are post-Zionist. They're saying it's racist to want this to be a Jewish state. You have the elites in the United States who are saying that American patriots are the moral equivalent of the Taliban. So why aren't they surrendering to the Americans? They're surrendering to the Taliban. Well, but no, the people who they want to fight and defeat are the people with American flags on their front porch, and the people who the Israeli left wants to defeat are the Israelis who love this country and never wanted to live anywhere else, and who are Jews. And so, you look at it, and the parallels are horrible and they're mind-boggling.
But it's always
defeat.
It's the same thing everywhere. It's globalists versus patriots.
That's your book too. And it's so horrible to see it, but we got to believe. We're God-fearing people. You got to just have faith that truth will out. And we're at a low point. We're definitely at a low point in this meeting between the two encrusted, corrupt elites at the White House on Thursday. Naftali, who represents nobody except for the post-Zionists and the anti-Zionists who he's beholden to, and Joe Biden. I keep calling him George. I don't know why, but Joe Biden, who's he's evil to the extent he's not an empty shell, and you look at this and you just say, well, this has to be a low point. Something has to give. This isn't going to last. There are too many of us. We care too much about our countries, and we're not going to let this go on.
Yeah, the question is, for Israel at least, the question is this reckoning going to come before or after a catastrophe? That's, I think.
Let's just leave it off with one last thought that I had. My friend Gershon Cohen, our friend Gershon Cohen, Major General Reserve, he wrote this article, he sent it to me the other day, and he was talking about this Taliban leader named Azam Abdallah, who was a Palestinian. He moved to Jordan. I think he was originally, can't remember where he was from, and he was one of the original founders of the Taliban. And I'm reading this, and I'm going, oh, for God's sake. I wrote about this guy 20 years ago, right? When all of us were studying up and we knew everything about Pakistan and we knew everything about the Taliban, and we learned all about the madrasas in Pakistan and in Jordan and where all of these people came from, the Islamic Jihad in Egypt, and the people who killed Sadat and how they all came together and what happened. And I said, I can't believe we're back to looking at these people again. I can't believe it. 20 years. Their weapons are 1,000,000 times more powerful. And we have to relearn everything that we learned 20 years ago. It's like we haven't gone anywhere. But it won't go on because it can't, because there are too many people in this country. There are too many people in America. There are too many people, in countries in Europe and elsewhere in the world, in India, in Korea, who are just not going to give up on their freedom. Even in Afghanistan, they're fighting. So we just have to, we have to do our part. Everybody has to do their part. And part of your part is to subscribe to our podcast and our webcast on Rumble, on YouTube, on all of the podcast platforms. They're all there on my website, carolynglick.com. They're all at the bottom of the YouTube channel. They're all at the bottom of the Rumble channel. Subscribe, send out our podcast, send out our webcast, share them. I know, we're going to get through it together. We're at a low point, but when it's always darkest before the dawn and all the rest of them, people say them all the time because at the end they're inevitably true. So listen, from Efrat and Tel Aviv with Gadi, we wish you all the best. And till next time, just hang in there. It'll work out somehow.
Amen, sister.
All right, brother.